A young woman vanished from her own home while her parents slept just a room away. Detectives couldn't find a single clue, and it seemed like solving this mystery was simply impossible. But eventually, the case took a shocking turn that uncovered the unexpected truth and left the whole country stunned. Alicia Ross was born on February 8, 1980 in Markham, Ontario. When she was just a baby, she was adopted by a couple who surrounded her with love and care. Later, her parents divorced and Alicia stayed with her mom, but she still saw her dad regularly. She loved being outdoors, and her biggest passion was canoeing. She would often head out to Lake Ontario where she could spend hours paddling across the open water. Eventually, she even started teaching kids how to canoe at local camps. After finishing school, Alicia got a job in sales at HP's Canadian branch, where she quickly proved herself as hardworking and reliable. At the time, she was still living with her mom, who had since remarried. Together with Alicia's stepdad, they converted the basement into a full apartment with its own entrance, so Alicia could stay close to her family while still having her own independence. On August 16, 2005, 25-year-old Alicia went out for an evening walk with her mom and their dogs. Alicia was in great spirits. She had just found out she was getting a promotion the next day. She shared the news with her mom, who wasn't the least bit surprised, knowing how seriously Alicia took her career. When they got back home, Alicia's boyfriend Sean stopped by to congratulate her. They spent a few hours together, and around midnight he headed home. The next day around noon, Sean called the police to report Alicia missing. He explained that when he got home the night before, he tried calling her, but she didn't answer. He figured she'd already gone to bed and didn't think much of it. But when she didn't pick up the phone the following morning either, he started to worry. Sean drove over to her place and saw that her car was still parked outside. That immediately struck him as odd. Alicia should have been at work hours ago, especially since it was the day she was supposed to get promoted. He knocked on her door, but no one answered. So he walked around to the back of the house and noticed the gate standing wide open. Lying on the grass were Alicia's shoes, an empty cup, and a pack of cigarettes. That was enough to send him into full panic mode, so he decided to call the police right away. After that, Sean called Alicia's mom and she and her husband rushed back home. By the time they arrived, several police cars were already outside. Officers went through the house, but found no sign of Alicia. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, but detectives noticed something deeply unsettling. It looked like Alicia had never gone to bed the night before. Her bed was neatly made. Freshly washed clothes she had planned to put away were still sitting out. And in the bathroom was her ring, the one she always took off before going to sleep. On top of that, all of her belongings, including her keys and purse, were still on the table. Police quickly confirmed she hadn't shown up for work and officially opened a missing person investigation. Detectives quickly concluded that Alicia hadn't just walked away from home. This looked much more like an abduction. Even though there were no real clues inside the house, her shoes lying by the open gate pointed towards something sinister. And since it looked like Alicia never went to bed that night, investigators believed she may have been taken right after her boyfriend left. Sean got home and called her just 15 minutes later, but by then she wasn't answering. It seemed as if someone had grabbed her the moment she stepped outside to see him off right there by that open gate. Alicia's mom hadn't heard anything unusual, and canvassing the neighbors turned up no leads either. With no other direction, police turned their attention to Sean, the most obvious suspect. He was the last person to see her, but detectives struggled to find any motive. The two had only been dating for about a month and a half, and everyone close to Alicia said the relationship was going smoothly. Police searched Sean's car and home, but found nothing suspicious. They also spoke with his neighbors, asking if they had noticed anything odd, like him taking out the trash in the middle of the night, but that led nowhere, too. Eventually, detectives started to doubt his involvement. They dug into Alicia's circle of friends and acquaintances, but no one stood out as suspicious. So detectives launched a massive search operation, setting up a command post inside a local school while the kids were away on summer break. They brought in search dogs, helicopters, and asked the public for help. On the very first day, around 60 people joined in, but by the next day, the number had grown to nearly 400. The response was so overwhelming that police actually had to send some volunteers home because they didn't have enough resources to manage such a huge group. Even so, the search for Alicia quickly became the largest in Ontario's history, and the story spread far beyond Canada's borders. There were a few reasons why the case grabbed so much attention. First, no one could understand how Alicia could vanish from her own backyard in a matter of minutes with no sounds, no witnesses, and no real clues. And second, from the very beginning, a lot of people pointed the finger at her boyfriend, convinced he had somehow pulled off the perfect crime. One detail that especially fueled suspicion was the fact that Sean called the police almost immediately after Alicia didn't pick up her phone. He had her mother's number, but instead of calling her first to check if she knew where Alicia was, he went straight to the police. About a week and a half after Alicia vanished, the media reported that Sean had refused to take a polygraph test and had stopped cooperating with the police. News that only fueled suspicions against him. Reporters also spoke with him directly, and he admitted that he believed he was now the prime suspect in the case. Meanwhile, the search was going nowhere. Police set up a hotline and got hundreds of calls, but not a single one brought them any closer to finding Alicia. Eventually, detectives had no choice but to call off the search operation and shut down the command post since the school they were using had to reopen as summer break was ending. A month went by and investigators still couldn't find a single new lead. They looked into ex-convicts living in the area, interviewed hundreds of Alicia's neighbors, spoke with her co-workers, but every path hit a dead end. At that point, detectives were leaning toward the idea that whoever kidnapped her must have known her personally. That would explain why no one ever heard her scream. That's how things stayed until September 20th, when the case suddenly took a shocking turn. A man walked into the police station with his lawyer and announced that he was the one who had killed Alicia Ross. The man was 31-year-old Daniel Sylvester, Alicia's neighbor, living just a few feet from her house. He said that around 1:30 a.m., he went outside for a walk and stepped into the narrow alleyway between their homes. That's where he ran into Alicia. Seeing him there in the middle of the night startled her, and she asked what he was doing. Daniel told her he had every right to stand outside his own house. An argument broke out, and according to Daniel, when Alicia insulted him, he completely lost control. He punched her, knocking her to the ground, and then kept hitting her as she tried to fight back. Enraged, he slammed her head against the stone walkway several times until she stopped moving. That's when he realized she wasn't breathing and that he had killed her. As he confessed, Daniel even laid down on the floor in front of detectives, physically acting out how he had beaten her to death. Panicking, he froze for a few minutes, not knowing what to do next. Then he made a decision. He had to get rid of the body. He dragged Alicia into his garage, washed the blood off the walkway with a garden hose, and lined the trunk of his mother's car with cardboard. His mom, by the way, was asleep inside the house at the time. He then stripped both himself and Alicia, stuffed the clothes into trash bags, and wrapped her head in rags, and duct tape to stop the blood before loading her into the trunk. After that, Daniel went back home, took a shower, and changed into clean clothes. Around 5 a.m., he got into his mother's car and drove about an hour out to a small town called Manila. He found some remote swampy area and dumped Alicia's body along with the trash bags containing their blood-stained clothes. When he returned home, he suddenly realized that along with his clothes, he had also accidentally thrown out his own wallet with all of his bank cards and driver's license. Over the next few days, Daniel kept going back to the site, desperately trying to find the bag, but he had hidden it so well that he couldn't locate the exact spot again. Still, he remembered exactly where he had left Alicia's body since he'd stashed it separately. A few weeks later, panic started creeping in. He was terrified the police would eventually find it, so he went back to move the remains. By that point, the body was badly decomposed, and he had to gather the remains piece by piece. He wrapped them in a tarp, put them in the trunk, and drove about 40 minutes away to a tiny town called Cobocan. There, he found a secluded spot in the woods and hid the body again. Afterward, Daniel confessed that he pleasured himself to ease the tension, but swore he never touched Alicia in a sexual way and that this was never his motive. After finishing his confession, Daniel said he never meant to kill Alicia, but his rage took over and he just couldn't stop himself. One of the detectives told him he should write a letter to Alicia's parents and apologized for what he'd done. Daniel broke down in tears, admitted he had no right to take their daughter away, and scribbled a short apology on a piece of paper. He also said he deeply regretted the pain he had caused his own mother, knowing she would now have to live the rest of her life carrying the shame of his actions. After Daniel's confession, detectives asked him to show them to the spot where he had hidden the body, and sure enough, they found Alicia's remains there. Because of how badly decomposed the body was, experts couldn't determine the exact cause of death, but they did confirm that at least 30 of her bones had been broken. They also discovered that not all of the remains were in that location, suggesting Daniel had left part of them at the first site. Right after that, he was placed under arrest, and the news sent shock waves through the community. Throughout the entire investigation, Daniel had never once been considered a suspect, even though he lived literally right next door. Soon, more details about him began surfacing in the media. Daniel had no criminal record, but he had struggled with anxiety and depression since childhood. He had a hard time interacting with other people, which made him an easy target for constant bullying. He also struggled with women, so grew up withdrawn and isolated. As an adult, Daniel spent nearly all of his time at home. None of his neighbors really knew him, and even Alicia's mother admitted she had only seen him just a few times over the years, and only in passing. In the end, Daniel was charged with second-degree murder, though his defense pushed for manslaughter, so the case went to trial. The proceedings began in May 2007, almost 2 years after Alicia's death. Prosecutors argued that Daniel had fully intended to kill her and that the original charge should stand. In their view, he could have been watching Alicia for a long time. After all, she lived just a few feet away. They suggested he might have spied on her through her window and that over time, this turned into an unhealthy obsession. That night, when Alicia was standing outside alone, Daniel likely saw an opportunity to approach her, but instead he frightened her by sneaking up in the dark alleyway. The prosecution emphasized that Daniel had countless chances to stop while he was attacking her. Yet he chose not to. Then, instead of calling police, he decided to hide the body, spending the entire night cleaning up and getting rid of evidence. Weeks later, he even went back to move the remains so investigators would have a harder time finding them. Because of all this, the prosecution believed Daniel wasn't motivated by guilt when he confessed, but by fear of being caught. After all, he had tossed out his wallet and ID in the same bag as Alicia's bloody clothing. Sooner or later, someone would have found it and tied him directly to the crime. For that reason, prosecutors insisted he deserved to be convicted of second-degree murder. His lawyer tried to convince the jury that Daniel never meant to kill Alicia, that it all happened in the heat of the moment. According to the defense, Daniel lost control after she insulted him and wasn't thinking clearly about what he was doing. They also pointed to his lifelong struggles, constant bullying that left him with low self-esteem, as well as anxiety and depression that had followed him into adulthood. But then something came out during the trial that didn't do him any favors. A psychiatrist who had evaluated Daniel before court testified that Daniel had admitted to violent fantasies about women. For example, he imagined jumping out of the bushes and attacking them. And he also confessed that he sometimes exposed himself to strangers on the street. That revelation pushed the jury even further toward believing that Daniel likely had planned to kill Alicia. In the end, he was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 16 years. After the verdict, Daniel tried to appeal his sentence, but nothing came of it. His first chance to apply for parole came in 2021, but there's no record of him being released. Since there's no public information suggesting otherwise,